All right, I'm going to keep that Menti going, and then I am going to start a quick presentation, and then we're going to go into a website demo. All right, so we are the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance, like I mentioned. And the thing that we do, that we have been doing, is putting out the vital signs report for the city of Baltimore every year. This is the 19th edition. And looking at data every year for our neighborhoods is kind of like having a stethoscope on all of our neighborhoods. And imagine if you had a stethoscope on your neighborhood, what would it be telling you? And that's basically what we want to share with you today. So to understand how to use data for neighborhoods, first we got to understand what neighborhoods even are. And we want to kind of think about a neighborhood as a bundle of goods. Your neighborhood is not just your house, right? It's a series of other things that you get by being able to locate in your neighborhood. And so my headphones are not working. So this is work from urban sociologist Robert Sampson, but you could kind of think about this in your own life, that Baltimore is a city of neighborhoods. We talk about that all the time, but what does that really mean? Baltimore is a city of neighborhoods because we have all these things that come with neighborhoods. Your neighborhood is your home. It becomes like where you hang your hat. It's your neighbors, it's your community. If your community is organized or not organized, that's all based on the location of your home. It becomes your services, what schools your children go to, how you're politically represented is completely based on your address. In Baltimore, it means your identity, your well-being. We know that now, unfortunately, your health outcomes are more connected to your zip code than to your genetic code, which is one of the reasons why our data is so important. And for our markets, what is a market in a neighborhood? It's your housing market and retail. So people don't think about that the place that they live is essentially a retail market. But where the grocery store is coming from, they're looking for aggregate demand in your neighborhood, as you all probably understand. The fact that you personally might have access to a grocery store has nothing to do with you personally. It has to do with the demand that your area or zip code or neighborhood represents. And that's what retail is. A bank is a retail institution, and that's what they're looking for, is aggregate demand. So this is what we are trying to figure out, how to kind of get at that access of neighborhoods by putting out data for all of you to use. And I'm going to basically show you not only what we see in the data, but also, of course, what we're learning and how you can use the data for yourselves. We are part of the National Neighborhood Indicators Partnership, which is a network of 30 cities around the country. If you are working at other cities, for example, you're more than welcome to find the BNIA partner in another city. And we put out the vital signs report. It is, like I mentioned, over 100 indicators for all of our neighborhoods in the city of Baltimore. And today, just given who the audience we think might be, I'm going to focus in on those things that matter to businesses and matter to community and economic development. So we're obviously going to focus in on our workforce chapter, our housing and community development chapter, and crime and safety, because this ends up being such a both real and perceived problem about our city. And in some cases it's perception, in some cases it's reality. But hopefully the data can help us both corroborate what we believe or also dispel some myths about what's going on really in our city. The other big news in 2020 is that all of our data is on an open data portal. We have our own data portal, and that portal is connected to the city's open data portal. So if you're familiar with the open data portal for the city of Baltimore, if you do click on the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance, which is now a feature, thanks to the great work at the city and on our own team, you can access our data in multiple ways. And that's what we want. We want this to be so easy for everyone in Baltimore to access that we're coming at you in different ways. So Baltimore's communities, we break it down into these 55 communities, and we can chat a little bit about boundaries. We're happy to do that. But what we want to show is that sometimes zooming out a little bit from, your parcel or your block helps you see the context that you're kind of trying to do any work in. Like if you're trying to start a business, or if you're trying to move into a neighborhood. Zooming out to show the broader context of a neighborhood sometimes becomes important because it sets the kind of overall message about what's going on and where you're trying to go. So 100 indicators, right? Well, there's one indicator that tends to matter the most, unfortunately, and this is population decline. We are the only East Coast city in the last decade, and I don't think the news is going to be any different when the 2020 census comes out, to lose population. And these are cities that had been losing population, just like Baltimore, starting in the 1950s, right? Who remembers, New York was almost in bankruptcy. Washington, D.C. was the murder capital of the world in 1990s, and they have all turned themselves around, except for Baltimore. And so this is kind of our existential problem, that we are the only East Coast city in that I-95 corridor megalopolis region that is continuing to lose population. And we have a lot to learn from our sister cities like Philadelphia or even Newark, New Jersey, not so far away. So even though the city lost roughly 5% in the last decade, that loss was not even, right? And this is the idea of the tale of two Baltimores. Some of our neighborhoods are growing like gangbusters. And if you go to that neighborhood, you think the rest of the city must be doing fantastic. The problem is that it's not the whole city, it's parts of the city. And while some of our city is growing like gangbusters, some of our city is dying. And that is the problem for us all, right? We cannot be a city where some of us are really, some of our neighborhoods are really struggling. But notice kind of politically, we're not necessarily organized to deal with the fact that some neighborhoods are growing. These are all the areas in green coming up and down the spine around the water. And some of our neighborhoods are declining, which is the areas in red. Our political leaders are not necessarily organized according to that one thing. I don't have to tell you anything about these neighborhoods, but you can imagine, you can see the pattern that we talk about a lot in the city of Baltimore called the Black Butterfly, predominantly African-American predominantly African-American neighborhoods coming off to the east and the west, and then a predominantly kind of white and a little bit more diverse areas in the center. And I'm gonna obviously talk more about that. So using the data, we gotta tell the story of Baltimore and tell it from a local perspective and not wait for people from outside the city to tell us what's going on. We know what's going on. We are tracking what's going on all the time. So like I mentioned, we do have disparity in terms of race. Predominantly African-American neighborhoods out here on the west side and coming down on the east side. This is what Dr. Lawrence Brown calls the Black Butterfly, the wings of the city, as he refers to them. And then of course, white population coming predominantly down the spine. So in general, for those that are not familiar, the city of Baltimore is roughly 65% Black in general, and then about 30% white. And not much in terms of Asian and Hispanic, which is possibly another issue that we can talk about. So when I say that the population change is the most important indicator, the question is why? And it's a simple indicator, right? Not rocket science to determine the difference between one point in time and another point in time in terms of population change. But your neighborhood could be one of three things. It could be growing, stable, or declining, right? Pretty simple. But once you have a growing neighborhood, for those of you that might be living in a growing neighborhood, you experience a suite of issues. You experience congestion, you experience growth in retail, which actually leads to growth in property crime. You feel the rise of housing prices and people fearing displacement. Those are all happening for real. These are actual problems of growth, legitimate problems of growth, but they are totally different problems than a neighborhood that is declining. Right? The number one indicator for a neighborhood that is declining is vacant and abandoned property. So then you beget all kinds of other things like illicit behavior, more violent crime than property crime. And when you lose population, you're losing everything else. You're losing enrollments, you're closing schools, you're losing aggregate demand. And so you're closing your retail, right? Your food, your banks, and everything else that goes with that, which is basically jobs. So when you start to lose population in a city like ours, in a neighborhood, you start to lose everything else in that bundle of goods that the neighborhood can provide. And then that becomes a vicious cycle that once you start to lose, you actually continue to lose. So I want to stop here for a second and actually invite you all to tell me on the places that you live, this is the Mentimeter. I think you can all see this again. To tell us, what do you think about your neighborhood? Is it actually growing or declining? And even though this is a relatively simple indicator to understand, it's interesting that sometimes just look around your neighborhood, you might not know. It's actually a very complicated data point to really understand. So I will let you all answer this question, and we can see people's responses. And so one of the things that we talk about, you know, in this tale of two cities, right? There's lots of ways to think about the tale of two cities. One thing to think about in terms of privilege, if you're living in a growing neighborhood, you have all of the benefits of living in a growing neighborhood, right? You have, if you want to sell your house, there's somebody that's going to buy it. Also in a pretty stable neighborhood, you're gonna be able to do that. The grocery store is going to come to your neighborhood because there's aggregate demand. Again, not just because of you, but because of everybody else that's there too. And so if you're living in a declining neighborhood, it becomes an ebb that you can't get out of. And that's what I want to show you when kind of we get to some of these indicators. All right, so we have nobody yet that is living in a declining neighborhood, which is part of our problem, right, at the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance. We want to reach folks that are living in declining neighborhoods so that they can see their own data and actually help them explain what the issues are in their neighborhoods. And it's a very challenging situation. So all of us are pretty much living in growing or stable neighborhoods. And for those of you that don't know, it's a hard thing to know. We don't know what's going to happen with the city of Baltimore until that census comes out. And so that's why it's so important, the census figures, to us as an organization, to all of our neighborhoods, and to all of us as a city. All right, so thanks for you can keep, I think, adding to this Mentimeter. And I am going to kind of go back to my presentation. And I probably only have about 5 more minutes of the presentation, and then we're going to go into Q&A. So like I mentioned, if you're a declining neighborhood, your #1 indicator is vacant and abandoned property. So this is probably a mental map that we all have, you know, East, West Baltimore. It is unfortunately predominantly in what Dr. Brown calls the black butterfly, but it's not all the way out to the west, right? We have some pretty decent parts of town out here to the west that are predominantly African-American. So even within the African-American experience, we have some neighborhoods that have extreme vacancy and some neighborhoods that are perfectly fine. But the good news in 2020, which we, you know, is hot off the presses, and Vital Signs, the recent release, we saw the lowest level of vacancy in the city of Baltimore in 2020. And that is great news for all of us. And the reason why we're seeing such low vacancies is that we are seeing investment, and we are seeing investment in, you know, rehabilitating property, which is kind of the grunt work for our neighborhoods, to be able to maintain existing housing stock, which means that you're continuously upgrading that existing structure. And you can see that that's happening in kind of these nicer neighborhoods out here on the west. So we're seeing, and then, you know, Upton, which had a lot of vacancy, but we can talk a little bit about what's been going on in Upton in terms of the planning process. They are seeing a lot of movement in terms of rehabilitation and development. So vacancy is related to permits. But again, this pattern of coming down the spine, I'm going to keep coming back to this pattern over and over again with different indicators because they are so interrelated, right? We saw, you know, racial divide. Here is our income divide. Canton became the #1 income neighborhood in the last American Communities Survey, the 2015-2019. Canton is now our #1 median income neighborhood. For those of you that are from Baltimore, this is maybe a shocker for some people. Nobody would have said Canton was our #1 median income neighborhood even 15 or 20 years ago if you had been down there. But now it is. It's higher than Guilford, higher than Roland Park. So we kind of slowly watched Canton creep up to where it is today. And South Baltimore is locus point. And the other kind of interesting thing in 2020, which is what I want to talk about in terms of perception, crime in general is way down in 2020. But what we are measuring, right, is crime in the public realm. So there's plenty of things that we don't know, like we don't know what has been going on in the private realm. We do have some evidence that domestic violence was up in 2020, and so maybe things that might have happened in the public realm were unfortunately possibly happening in the private realm. So it doesn't mean that we've solved all our problems, but in general, 2020 saw a huge reduction in public area crime, but not in homicide. Homicide did not go down at all. We saw the 6th year in a row for 300 plus homicides in the city of Baltimore. But homicides in some ways is a totally different kind of crime, right? Than a burglary or a robbery or a larceny that's happening in the public realm. Very much dependent on social networks and things that are, maybe self-retribution and things like that. So the news is all about the homicide, but the reality for people in most of our neighborhoods was that crime was way down in all of our neighborhoods. So what is going on in the story of Baltimore, right? We have some neighborhoods are growing like gangbusters, some that are declining. We have, pretty good news in terms of vacancy. Vacancy is down as a city. Crime is actually down as a city. So what is going on that we cannot turn ourselves around like those other cities like Philadelphia and Newark? And the issue is about connectedness. How connected are our communities? And so we have to dig deeper than data that you might read about in the paper or data that you might have thought about yourselves. We have to actually dig deeper and think about connectivity. And this becomes the thing that is our missing link, I guess maybe pun intended. So these are the neighborhoods that grew, right? We said coming down the spine and then up in the Northeast. And notice where they're located in relation to our highway system, right? Every neighborhood that had access to a highway interchange, this is I-83, this is I-95, this is 295 and 695, every neighborhood that had access to our kind of mobility system, which right now is unfortunately our highway system, has grown. Why? Because they're connected. In this case, they're physically connected, but I'm going to show you that physical connection has led to so many other kinds of connectivity as well. This is our subway line. If anybody's ever taken the subway, I don't know, raise your hand if you've ever taken the subway, but it's not an accessibility feature. And so it's not actually kind of leading to connectivity for the neighborhoods where that subway line is located. The Northwest light rail line happens to follow our highway, so it's a little bit of a different beast. And the reason why connectivity matters, ooh, we have questions. Yeah, Elliot. Hey, Elliot. Go ahead, if you want to unmute yourself. Or Morgan, I see your hand too. If you want to unmute yourself, go ahead. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask me the question. Oh, it's not letting you. Okay, well then we will let you do that when I'm done with this presentation. So sorry about that, but hold on to your question or put it in the chat and we will we'll do that at the end. So connectivity is so important, and the one way to get at having people understand what lack of connectivity means is this commute time. So this is the 45-minute commute time. And notice again, unfortunately, this pattern where right in the middle of our city, we have people that are traveling more than 45 minutes to work. And these are going, not areas that had high vacancy, but also kind of going all the way out to the west. And then coming down that spine, the York Road spine. So one of the things about the 45 commute time is that one of the reasons to live in a city is to have better access to your job, right? So that you have a short commute time. But what does it mean when we have so many communities with long commutes? That means that they are leaving their neighborhood and they are basically taking a lot of social capital with them when they leave. If you're leaving, your best people, right, the people that are employed are actually leaving your neighborhood for more than an hour and a half every day. They can't go to the parent-teacher conference. They can't come to the community meeting because they are not there. So that's the way to think about, you know, thinking about how to look at something that could be useful to a neighborhood is looking at that commute time. So why does connectivity matter? And this is about economic development for those that are, connectivity matters because it creates density. It creates density, and I don't just mean, you know, physical density. I mean, it's density of knowledge. It's density of people talking to each other. It's density of exchange, right? And so connectivity is all about that thickness of markets. And that's what we need. Some of our neighborhoods have that. And that's why they're growing. And some of our neighborhoods do not have that thickness. They don't have kind of all of the permutations that a node of connectivity can yield. So this is a very quick way to think about it. And these are this is network theory for those of you that are networkists, that if you have a node, you know, if you have these two nodes, that's only one connection, but as soon as you double your nodes, you've gone up by 6 times. And then, you know, if you quadruple your nodes, you've gone up, you know, by 28 times. And so it becomes exponentially faster the more nodes you have. So really it's about putting stake in some of our neighborhoods, whatever that looks like. It could be a physical node, it could be a digital node, it could be a capital node. And so that is a lot of the work that you're going to hear about at Baltimore Innovation. So this is a work that comes to us from the 21st Century Cities at Johns Hopkins. They are looking at small business investment, and we have just no small business investment on this west side of town. So they're not connected to capital. That's one way to think about connectivity. This is digital connectivity. This is unfortunately what, before the pandemic, we knew that we had so many people that were disconnected from the internet. And how are you going to get to school? How are you going to get to work? And notice the relationship between lack of digital access and unemployment. You know, none of you have to be a GIS specialist to see this pattern. So I'm going to go into a demo and I'm going to try and answer these questions, and maybe we can figure out if we can get these unmuted, and happy to take your questions. Logan, if you could help me with that. The point is that this is what we're seeing in the data, right? But all of you want to know how you can make your own decisions with the data. And so I am going to jump over to our main website. I'm going to show you a little bit about how to answer your own questions, and maybe I'll take a look at for the chat. And we have a new thing that we worked on with Innovation Works out of called the Guidepost, which I'm going to show you how to do, which is specifically meant for businesses. And then I'm going to show you how to use our open data portal. And sorry if that was fast, but I knew I wanted to get to the demo before I ran out of time. All right, so let me take a look at some of these questions. So you're taking the light rail because it's actually working for you. It's reducing your commute. Reducing your commute is actually, we know, oh, Elliot, you raised your hand because you were using the Metro. Yay, that's good to know. Anything else in the chat before the benefits of growth are not apparent. We have all the signs of decline. Well, hopefully maybe we can actually take a look at your neighborhood and see what the data is showing you. And basically thinking about how do you use data to, make the case of, what your neighborhood truly needs. So I am going to jump over now to our website. And that is mostly what the rest of this conversation is going to be about how you can use our resources for your purposes. All right. So 21215. I'm going to basically walk you through and 21213.
No, it's 21225.
And what neighborhood is that?
It's Brooklyn and Curtis Bay and Hawkins Point all linked together.
So this is our main website. And I guess, Logan, if you want to go ahead and put that in the chat. This is our main website. And for those that are kind of data geeks like us, you can imagine we have got a data cube. We have 55 communities. We have 100 different indicators, and our data goes back 20 years. And so that data cube, right, 55 by 100 by 20, that data cube we want to have people access in multiple ways. So one is that you do it by community. One is that you do it by topic. If you're just really interested in workforce development or housing, you can look at just the indicators associated with that. And then one is by indicator. So if you really know, what you want to look for, vacant and abandoned housing, you can do, a key word search and click on whatever indicator you might be interested in. So depending on how you get so the question though is, what is going on in Brooklyn Curtis Bay? And so you can do a drop down if you want, Brooklyn Curtis Bay, but if you know where it is, you can actually go into that and you'll see which neighborhoods associated with our communities. Our communities are larger than just one neighborhood. So like you said, they are connected here. And so you can go ahead and get that data for that community. And so we are in the process of creating 2019 and 2020 data. We have most of the data for census, housing. In next week, we actually have a webinar about health. We have crime. And then so some of them are not quite 19 yet. We're putting it out serially. So in general, if you want to take a look at some of your data, you can see, for housing, what is going on in 2019. And the question is, what does that mean to have a house sold in 2019 for $57,000? You can then possibly click on any one of these indicators and then go to that particular indicator for every neighborhood. You can download. We have lots of people that use this for grant writing, for other things that you might be doing. And you can compare years. So if you want to go back and say, what has been going on in Brooklyn Curtis Bay for the last 5 years, and make sure you're still in Brooklyn Curtis Bay. Let's hope that stays there. Update your selection. And did I get back to, oops. This wasn't working last week, so it may not be working right now. And it does not look like it's working. Yep, it's automatically going to Baltimore City. So you know what I'm going to tell my developer to fix that. But you can always go back to the home page and kind of go back and look by topic or by indicators. So if you want to look at income, median income, and hit go, for any one of our indicators, you get a dedicated indicator page. There's its own URL for this. And then you can look at, what are we going to show you? If I sort, our lowest is right now Upton, and our highest, again, is that Canton. This is in tabular form, of course. You can look at this in terms of bar charts. And, this bar chart basically becomes a visualization and disparity for our city, right? Just huge disparity. And unfortunately, every single one of our indicators shows disparities. And then when you really look at it, you can see kind of clustering of disparity. And then we can see trends. So when you come into the trend line, the first thing that you're going to see is Baltimore City. And then you can, let's look at Brooklyn Curtis Bay, what's going on. You can see that Brooklyn Curtis Bay is less than the city in terms of median income, but it's actually going in the wrong direction, a lower direction, which you might. And for you that live in Brooklyn Curtis Bay, this might be something that you use to try and talk about with your community, or you might want to look at the surrounding community. So Cherry Hill is right next door, what's going on? So you can see a little bit of difference between, but then maybe there's an aspirational neighborhood that you want to become closer to something else. I don't know, maybe you want to become closer to Hamden, and then you can start to see kind of the difference between. And so this becomes a way for, anybody to use essentially data to show trends, and the visualization is meant to be accessible to anyone. And then the last one is the map, right? So all of our maps are connected to an open data API, which I'm going to show you in a second. So is there a data set that shows the percent of residents that live in a hub zone? Not yet, but I'm sure we could probably, calculate one. If we know which communities are in a hub zone, we could certainly basically take that data and make the calculation. There was another question about which ones are in opportunity zones, and I will show you, I think at the very beginning, somebody asked, which ones are in opportunity zones, and I will be able to show you something. We do have an interactive website that shows you the relationship between opportunity zones and our community. So I'll show you that after I'm done with this one. And then have you integrated this into social science classes in Baltimore City? Great question. And I do want to just quickly talk about some of so the vital signs report is our lion's share. You can literally do what I just did with median income with over 110 different indicators, which is wonderful, right? Hopefully all of you are, but it's a lot of information, right? It's a ton of information. So our main audience is communities, right? So we're going into communities, we're working with the community organizations themselves, we're working with nonprofits that might work in those communities. And so the biggest thing that we do is show people their own community vital signs that, really digging into the neighborhood data, which I wasn't actually able to show you for Brooklyn Curtis Bay, but that's what we do. We actually go in and train people. Hey, your median income is lower than the citywide average, or your vacancy rate is higher than the citywide average, whatever the issue might be, and actually walk them through their vital signs, just like you go to the doctor's office and you get your vital signs report with your blood work, and you're looking for things that are going in the wrong direction or going, out of range. And that's what we do with communities. But even though that's our main audience, we have lots of other audiences like teachers. And I mean teachers very broadly, like teachers in the public school system might be one, but faculty could be another. And so for those of you that are faculty in higher educational institutions, but I want to think of everybody as a teacher. All of you now are being trained to essentially be teachers to your coworkers, to your community, to your legislators, whoever. This is all part of a learning community. So now we're welcoming you to our learning community. And we want to basically provide resources for people to learn on their own. Like I mentioned, it's about you being able to make decisions with data. So the learning community is meant for anybody that wants to kind of use the information to both teach or learn. We have lots of great visualizations for you here in our learning community that are connected to our story map, which I'll show you in a minute. And for instructors, we're super excited to tell you about our learning modules. These are learning modules that are meant for anybody, but pretty much a teacher or faculty, to work with a group, maybe a group of 10, maybe a group of 20, and actually walk through step-by-step instructions of navigating our website, but also answering questions like, what are the top 5 neighborhoods in the city of Baltimore with children living in poverty? And what does that mean? And how is that related to unemployment? And how is that related to life expectancy? And so these instructions are Word documents that you are welcome to use in your classroom, in your in any kind of group setting, really. We're meant to kind of walk through using the data. And I'm going to tell you about our biggest event, more about learning, which is coming up. It's Baltimore Data. It used to just be one day, but since we're all virtual, we also now call it Baltimore Data Week, which is very related to Baltimore Innovation Week. And that is coming up in July. And this is all meant to be a way for people to learn about how to use our resources as well. So feel free to join us, even though this is probably the last thing I should say. Stay connected with us if you want to both learn about our data, learn more about Baltimore Data Week that's coming up in July, and stay connected with us. All right, so that is one way to get information. The next way I want to show you, and again, remember, it's the same data cube, but the way people think is going to be different. So we created the community guidepost, which is part of our resource library, with Innovation Works, which is meant to basically create, for those of you that are not familiar with Innovation Works, and I'm sure you're going to hear from Jay later on this week, they are trying to kind of be disruptive and create opportunities for, that connectedness for entrepreneurs in some of our, less connected neighborhoods. And so we created this with them in mind, and we wanted to create a way for them to see where would and how would your investment, if you fit into this category, how would your investment kind of fare in the kind of how a neighborhood is trending? Because you are, like I mentioned, the neighborhood itself has a context. And so if you are entering a neighborhood to do anything, to buy a house, to build a business, to do anything, to run an after-school program, the neighborhood itself has a life, right? It has a personality, it has its own indicators. And so you have to get to know the context that you're getting into, so that you know if your business venture is going to fail or if you're going to be successful, or what else you need to leverage in order for you to be successful. What was 212, what was the other zip code that I got? 21223, Camilla. What neighborhood is that? Or what is a neighborhood in 21223? So we think in neighborhoods in Baltimore. I'm at BNIA. I'm terrible with zip codes. Anybody know what 21223 is for a neighborhood?
I believe it's the Southwest.
The Southwest. All right. So let us go maybe to Edmondson Village. Not exactly. That's a little bit west. So I want to know how I want to maybe start a business in Edmondson Village. Unfortunately, the shopping center there is in need of great help. So let's say you wanted to invest somewhere around that shopping center in Edmondson Village. You would, and this is available for all of you. So maybe Logan, maybe I can grab it. I'm going to put that in the chat so all of you can tag along and join us in this little demo too. It's called the Community Guidepost. So I picked Edmondson Village, and I want to see what's been going on in Edmondson Village for the last, you could go all the way back to 2010, but I just want to see the last 5 years, because maybe 2010, I don't really care about the Great Recession, whatever, you can pick your years. And then we want you to, we have a lot of indicators, right? But those indicators are representative of a broader context, a broader concept. And so we've basically curated those indicators for you. What do you really care about? So let's say you really care about the real estate market, and we have curated the indicators that we think are most related to real estate. And these actually cross over different topics. So you don't have to do that thinking yourself, but maybe you don't really care about tax liens, so you can take that off. Or maybe you do care about tax liens. Whatever you want to look at, you can check or uncheck what you want. And then you care about comparing your community in some way. So you could choose, exactly what you want to compare it to. You can pick your community. I just want to know what's going on around Edmondson Village. And so you'll get the top 5 adjacent neighborhoods to, geographically adjacent neighborhoods to Edmondson Village. And you can maybe pick a neighborhood that's similar to Edmondson Village on the real estate indicators. So for those of you that do statistics, this is using K-means and looking for the cluster, the top 5 cluster using K-means for the indicators that are there. So this is interesting, right? It changed a little bit. And so by using the real estate indicators, actually Edmondson Village becomes similar to Brooklyn Curtis Bay and similar to Canton on some of these indicators, which is interesting. Well, you might not think about that. And the reason why choosing that similarity of community is so important is because what we're seeing is that so many neighborhoods actually have something in common, but they're physically distant. And so politically, we're not really organized to kind of cross-fertilize ideas. And so this became something that we know is but we can see in the indicators that this neighborhood has something in common with one, on the other side of town. So if you, we do have a 1-pager that we can send to you. So if you join our get notifications, we'll be happy to do that, but we can also send that to all attendees. We have a 1-pager on how to do this. So you can see where Edmondson Village, you can see one of the reasons why it's getting similar to Canton is because this huge jump in permits. Like I mentioned, we did see a lot of permit increase in the last couple of years on that west side of town. And then you can also look at trends. You can look at every single indicator and then also look at trends. So you can, and then you can download all of this for your business model, and you can see what is going on in Edmondson Village in relation to another location, so that your investment can make some sense to you, or maybe not make some sense. And so one of the reasons why Edmondson Village is similar to some others is because it does have a pretty low rate of vacancy. But look at Brooklyn Curtis Bay, it's kind of inching up higher. It's getting, crossing over the citywide average and getting closer to that 8% mark, Brooklyn Curtis Bay. So that's the guidepost. I'm going to come back to our main website. So we have the learning community for those of you that are teachers. We have the guideposts for those of you that are investors. And then we obviously have our main website, which is for communities. And then I'm going to finally go to our open data portal. So our open data portal has lots of open data. We're going to maybe spend a little bit of time about our coronavirus open data portal that we've been creating over the past year, which has extremely up-to-date information. It had been updated weekly and then monthly for a while there, we didn't know what was happening in our neighborhoods. But I'm going to first start with our open data, Vital Signs open data portal. And like I mentioned, this open data portal is completely connected to Baltimore open data. So this is for developers. This is for all of you that are possibly creating websites and want to basically link to API or download data yourself, for those of you that are data analysts. And again, has the same set of data that's on our main website, but again, meant for a little bit more technically oriented user. So anybody have a favorite indicator that they want to, thanks, Elliot. Thanks for being here as always. But you want to drop a favorite indicator before you go? Or anybody have a favorite indicator? And then I do want to go back and show you that one last thing about how to access the opportunity zones too. I'm going to show you something about COVID in a second, but let's do, should we do trees planted? Is that like such an innocuous, what can't be happier than how many trees we planted in the city of Baltimore? So if you pick anything, let me just show you what happens. You're going to get what's this 2 layers. And so we have data for the city of Baltimore, which is one geography. And we also have by the community itself. So anytime you come into any one of our indicators on the open API, you got to separate out the city from the community. We're going to go into the community. Yeah, we do have an entire section on health. And we actually have a webinar next week on health. So if you join our Get Notifications, we'll be able to send you information about our webinar next week about health. So for those that are maybe not familiar on how to use an open data API, what you'll get is this landing page, which is the overview, which gives you kind of what is in this indicator, number of trees planted annually. This is a happy indicator. If you click on any one of the years, you'll get basically the histogram, how many communities had between 0 and 50 trees planted, and that's 34. And then we had very few neighborhoods that are way out here, one neighborhood with more than 350 trees planted. So if I clicked on any one of these, I think that will, oh no, not if I click on this, but let's say I wanted to know which were the neighborhoods that were between 100 and 150 150 trees planted. I know there are 10 of them. What I do is go to the data section and click on this little filter button here with 2010. And then I want to know all of the communities that are between 100 and 150. And you get the filtered, I get those 10 communities that in 2019 planted between 100 and 110, 150 trees. And then you can see on the map where they were located. Now you can do this with every indicator that we have. It's the same data that's on our website. It's the same data on our open data portal. It just provides a different way to visualize the data. And then of course you can download the data, just what I filtered, as a spreadsheet or as a shapefile, or the full data set if you want. And then for those of you that are interested in the APIs, it's a dedicated API. And so this API is what the Open Baltimore is connecting to directly. There is tree canopy as well, but the tree canopy doesn't change very often, right? It doesn't change annually. Trees planted will change annually. And so our canopy pretty much, I think the last time, we pretty much get it once every 7 to 8 years, but we do have it as of 2018, I think, our canopy. All right, so that's our open data, our vital signs open data portal. I'm gonna go back to our regular open data portal. Can I go back to my regular open data portal? I guess I can't. I'm gonna head back to our open data portal where vital signs is one aspect of that, and talk about Corona. So what happened during the pandemic? We're pretty excited about the fact that we are able to issue this work. Sad that obviously we had to do it over the last year. This is connected to a bunch of different APIs that have been putting out on a weekly basis, in this case, a daily basis. This is the Maryland Department of Health. So you can see by zip code how many, where our vaccination sites are, how many COVID cases there have been throughout each zip code, and then where we've had unemployment assistance too. So this is weekly claims through last summer of where people were claiming unemployment during the pandemic. And, you know, basically the question is, are our vaccination sites addressing different needs? So are vaccination sites, where are they located in relation to where people have access to the internet? Because we knew that that was a problem. If you're gonna get a vaccine and you have to go online to make an appointment, and if you don't have access to the internet, that's a problem. And then notice, hopefully for all of you, the world doesn't end at the city-county line, even though most of our maps right now do. So this was our way of foraying into the Baltimore County, because some of the issues will cross over. It's not just the city that has these issues. So all of these indicators are now available for the county as well, for those of you that live in the county. You can see where we have, you know, race coming out into the county. And so these data, there's about 10 different vital signs indicators that are now available for Baltimore County as well. Besides that landing, you know, what's going on in terms of Corona, the question was, what happened in our city? What is going on in our neighborhoods? And so for all of you that know, we have 3 major assistance calls. We have 911, which is of course emergency calls. We have 311, which is non-emergency calls. And then we have 211, which is calls for help. Imagine, what are these? These are sensors coming out of all of our zip codes. Every day, there's 4,000 calls to 311, and I don't even know how many calls to 911 on a daily basis. And so that became a way to kind of figure out what do people need in a neighborhood right now. So notice this, you know, we can see a little bit of seasonality in June. And then you can turn on and off anything that you need. So for example, we mentioned we don't have much by way of what's going on inside people's houses, but this family disturbance became, you know, maybe something that we can get at in terms of, you know, what might be happening inside the house. And so you can see kind of the rates, and then you can go ahead, you can see how many cases there have been so far in the city of Baltimore for COVID cases. And then you can pick a zip code. So now you can pick a zip code, even though I don't know these zip codes. So here's 21223, and then the data will automatically, you know, pick your zip code, and then you can do the same for what happened in your zip code by 311 calls and 211 calls. And 211, you know, what are people calling for? Absolutely, food became the #1 thing that people were calling for, which was very new for the United Way, which collects these 211 calls. But then you can see different things that people were calling for, and then, you know, pick a different zip code and you would basically change the data. So the data will change according to the zip code that you're in. There's a very small zip code, so maybe that's not fair, but we can kind of maybe look at a bigger zip code. And so this is available for all of you to kind of figure out what was happening in your zip code. And then finally, the crime. We tracked what was going on in terms of crime incidents. The same here, you can actually do it by neighborhood. Not all data comes in the same ways. So if you really want to know what was happening in Ashburton, a very small, not high crime neighborhood, you can see what was going on in that neighborhood. So that's our crime. And then the last thing I want to show you for now, if I don't have any other questions is there's lots of blogs. We write lots of blogs. They're meant to be short. They're meant to be accessible. So hopefully, you take a look at it. But we do have an interactive map that shows where our opportunity zones are. So if you click on this, and maybe I will put that in the chat too. It's an interactive website that allows you to essentially look at the relationship between opportunity zones, our communities, and other issues around the Baltimore impact zones. This is the Baltimore NIF, what is Baltimore Impact Investment Fund, and how the city is declaring different parts of the city to be impact areas. The green is obviously where we have opportunity zones. And then you can always look at data behind the opportunity zone. So if you click on, this particular opportunity zone, you can then come in and figure out which census tract it is, gives you a little bit of data on the median income, and then you can see that it's associated with which CSA, and then get more information about that. So the census tract that you're interested in figuring out which, and then when you click on this, it goes back to where we started looking at community data. The last thing I want to talk about is that, everything that I showed you is what you might call data science, right? But not necessarily rocket science. It's very hard work to do what we do, but it is not in the end, but it's about gathering, integrating, putting it together, and making it actually make sense to a wide variety of people. And so that's the kind of stuff that we want to teach the next generation. And so we are working under an NSF grant that with area institutions around the region. We're working with Towson University, Bowie State, and UMBC on creating a data science core. And so we are trying to train University of Baltimore students on how to do the work that we're doing, which is essentially everything that you saw. Understanding why the data is important, having a very clear purpose for the data, putting it out in ways that meet multiple objectives and meet people where they are in terms of their own data skills. And so we are working with the University of Baltimore students. So if you know young people that are interested in data science, send them to the University of Baltimore. We have both a database management program as well as an applied information technology. And if you want to host one of our, so if you have a student that wants to become a data scientist and learn from us, we have a training curriculum. But if you're interested in potentially hosting a data science student as a company or as an organization doing good work in the city of Baltimore, we now have several hosts that have taken on some of our students, and they have been working on things like developing an index or understanding data, looking at illicit behavior. So these are some of the projects over the last year that some of our data science students have been working on with organizations. So I'm going to put this host intake form in the chat in case you do want to host a data science student. It gives a little bit more information about what that program is about. It's meant to, if you have a 3-month project and we are training students, what would you do with somebody like that? So hopefully that was a good overview of what we do, what we see, but more importantly, how you can use that data for your own decision making. And then maybe even join us with one of our data science students. And I think I'm exactly at time. Any questions that I didn't answer? What advice? Thank you, Shan. We actually have a series of 4 objectives that we are trying to work on every neighborhood. We want every neighborhood to be diverse in terms of its housing stock. You got to be able to own, you got to be able to rent, you got to be able to have subsidized housing in your neighborhood. We not want every neighborhood to be occupied. We have got to deal with our vacancy problem in some of our neighborhoods. And the third one is that you've got to have transit, you got to have connectivity. You got to be able to have mobility, accessibility into and out of your neighborhood, however that looks like. And then the last thing is that you got to be connected to digital resources, capital resources, and social resources. So those are the 4 things. We are working with our new mayor. We are working with our new city council group to try and work on all those transitions. And that is kind of where we are. But you all are now part of what we would call our alliance. People that are going to use the data, actually make data-driven decisions for our city, and be strategic about the way we are using resources. We want to work with the media too, if any of you are in the media, because telling our story through the media using data is going to be so important, so that we act strategically, we use our resources in a way that actually gets us out and into the 21st century. Thank you, everybody.